Hi, today I'm going to be helping you understand genetic genealogy and what your DNA results mean. Just as a little introduction, my name is Olivia Fortiani and I'm from Utah in the United States. I'm a senior at BYU and I'm studying genetics and I'm double minoring in family history and business. So I love genetics, I love family history, and I love combining the two to research my ancestors. So to begin, I wanted to state that the content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein belong solely to me and do not necessarily reflect the views of FamilySearch International and RootsTech. However, with my training in genetics, family history, and especially genetic genealogy, I have made sure that all my claims are accurate. Also, because this presentation was pre-recorded, please feel free to type your questions in the chat. There will be people available to answer your questions during this presentation. I might also be online to answer your questions. So, have you ever wondered if your siblings will have different DNA and ethnicity results than you do? Who should you test in your family? What does CM on my cousin matches page stand for? Or how CM can help you figure out relationships? Why a chromosome browser would be helpful, or if you should contact all your matches, even the ones that you hardly share any DNA with. These are some common questions asked that I will be answering today. We're going to start by jumping in with a little science first, and don't worry, because this information will help you understand the genealogy and the answers to these questions. And we're going to keep it basic, so just follow along and I'll do my best to explain it in a basic and understandable way. So we're going to start with the basics of inheritance. This is important in understanding what your test is measuring and who to test in your family. Humans have 22 pairs of autosomal chromosomes called autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. And if you can see down here is the sex chromosome, and the rest of these are the autosomes. The sex chromosomes determine whether someone is a male or a female. A male has an X and a Y chromosome, and a female has 2 X's. You can see in the image, this person has their 23rd pair of chromosomes as an X and a Y, so this person is a male. We're going to focus on the 22 pairs of autosomes for this presentation. The general DNA tests that people take when they're getting tested with Ancestry or 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, all those awesome companies, when you take a DNA test, it's an autosomal DNA test. Autosomes control the inheritance of all our characteristics and traits other than the traits that are linked to sex, which are found on the sex chromosomes. The genes located on each chromosome specify certain traits, physical ones like eye color or hair thickness, but also ones you can't see, like blood type. These genes have different variations, which are called alleles. These alleles are different versions of the same gene are what determine whether you have freckles or not, or whether you have brown or blonde hair, for example. Each of your parents have 2 alleles or copies of each gene, and they pass down 1 copy so that you have 2 copies too. So in this picture, you can see that you have a chromosome from your mom and you have a chromosome from your dad. These chromosomes replicate, and what these are called when they're replicated are sister chromatids. And first, we're going to be looking at this left side where it says no crossing over. First, the maternal and paternal chromosomes are together, and then they're split into different cells. Next, the sister chromatids are split into different cells. However, on this side, we're missing a step. So let's look at the right side. Something super important happens, so pay attention. Here we see there's a step called chromosome recombination or crossing over. The chromosomes cross and they shuffle their genes a little bit. So you can see this pink and the green, and those get shuffled. Some of the genes from the chromosome from mom go to the chromosome from dad and vice versa. This image shows just a little piece that gets switched, but in reality, tons of your genes switch sides. In this case, after the chromosomes are separated, you have 4 unique chromosomes in each daughter cell. See how they're all different, whereas this one has 2 of the same and 2 of the same. This crossing over allows for genetic variation and diversity. It's also why siblings look different. Siblings all have DNA from the same mom and dad, but it's a random combination of which alleles they will get. So I looked up the total possible amount of combinations because each chromosome can contain thousands of different genes. The total possible combination of alleles for those genes in humans is approximately 70,368,744,177,664. So don't ask me how they figured that out because I have no idea. But that's a lot. There's a lot of diversity all because of recombination. So let's talk about percentages inherited by generation. Here you are on the chart right here. You receive about 50% from each parent. And that also means that you inherit about 25% of your DNA from each grandparent, 12.5% of your DNA from each great-grandparent, 6.25% from each great-great-grandparent, and so on. However, remember how we talked about recombination? You'll still inherit 50% from each parent, but in reality, because of the recombination and gene shuffling between the chromosomes, you might only get 23% from one grandparent and 27% from another, or you could get like 9% from a great-grandparent and 16% from the other great-grandparent. So now that we have the scientific background, let's tie this back into genealogy. So when you take that general DNA test, we've talked about this autosomal DNA test, the autosomal chromosomes are passed down from both parents to all their kids. So this test helps you measure the DNA you receive from every single one of these lines in your tree. However, it's only useful to about 5 or 6 generations back because of the recombination. 6 generations back, you may have only inherited 1% of all your DNA from that person. There's also a chance you didn't inherit any DNA from them at all. Because of all the recombination, it was just recombined out. This next chart shows the probability that you didn't inherit any DNA from an ancestor. So this is that there's a 0% chance that you didn't inherit any DNA from your great-grandparent. Or in other words, you could say that there's a 100% chance that you inherited DNA from them. As you go down the chart, when you get to the 6th great-grandparent, there's an 18% chance that you don't have a detectable DNA relationship with them. This information tells us who to test. So this is a picture of my great-grandmother and her siblings. My great-grandma is this one. And yeah, these are all her siblings. You can see they all look a lot alike. So you might think that it's useless for siblings to get DNA tests because they both inherited 50% from each parent and they have the same parents. However, they could have inherited some DNA from a distant ancestor that you didn't inherit any DNA from. Or they could have inherited different portions of DNA that you did from your grandparents or great-grandparents. Because of this, they will have different cousin matches than you will. That's important because cousin matches can be used in finding missing ancestors in your tree. Your sibling might have a cousin match that you don't have, and that person might turn out to be the missing link you have been looking for. So if you have the time and means, it is definitely not a waste of money to test your siblings. Their cousin matches may be a little bit different, and their ethnicity results will differ a little bit too. Remember, this is because of recombination. Also, with autosomal DNA testing, you should always test the oldest generation in the family. Not the oldest person, the oldest generation. So if you have a cousin who's older than an aunt or uncle, that doesn't matter because, like I said, you want the oldest generation, not the oldest person. That's because each time there's a new generation, recombination happens again. So if you're able to test a grandparent, that's 2 more generations back than you have access to now that you didn't before. Okay, now we can go on. So this page is what your match page will look like. I blocked out names and pictures for privacy. And this page will look a little bit different depending on which testing company you use, but they're all pretty similar. So I'll just be using this one. So your testing company will group your matches based on how many CM you share. So if you can see right here, this person's my dad, and we share 3,395 CM across 41 segments. And then as we go down, these are his two parents, my grandparents. I share fewer or less CM with each person. So that's how it's grouped. So yeah, it's grouped from closest family to furthest away family. So how they know who's the closest is based on this CM. So what is CM? CM stands for centimorgan. A centimorgan is a unit of measurement used to measure genetic linkage or distance along a chromosome. And the more centimorgans shared between two people, the more closely related they'll be. So we're going to look at one of my cousins. I've blocked out her name for privacy, and we share 74 centimorgans. And I uploaded my DNA results to DNA Painter, which is a website that you can find online. And I believe that if you want to use this chromosome browser, which I'm going to be explaining, I believe the first time you use it, the first time you use it, it's free. But then if you want to keep making more of these charts for different people, then you have to pay. So I used this chromosome browser because the testing company that I used didn't have a chromosome browser available. Some of them do, and some of them don't. So this top picture shows my 22 autosomal chromosomes, starting with the first pair and going down to the 22nd pair with my X chromosomes at the bottom. I'm a female, so I have two X's. So remember that, that's why they're the same length. If you're a male, you would have an X and a Y at the bottom. And if you can see, it's kind of hard to tell, but this top chromosome for each is like a faded blue color, and then below is a pink color. So that means the top is the paternal chromosome, the pink is the maternal chromosome. And so I've mapped about 6 matches on here to see where we inherited the same portions of DNA from a common ancestor. And if there are 2 of my cousin matches where their segments overlap with each other, that means the 3 of us all got that segment of our chromosome from the same ancestor. In other words, we are a triangulated match. So the reason you want to know this is because it can be really helpful when you're trying to figure out who one of your ancestors is. If you find a cousin, if you find a couple of cousin matches who share the same portion of chromosome with you, that means you'll all share a common ancestor. So let's look at this second picture. This shows where I share centimorgans with the cousin that I talked about, whose name I've blacked out. And we share, so that's what this means when it says 74 centimorgans, that's the amount of DNA we share with each other. And then it's across 3 segments. So that's split into 3 different segments on our chromosomes. And these 3 segments could all be on the same chromosome but split up, or they can be on different ones. Doesn't really matter, but you'll see that when you map it on here. And if you can tell, this is on the paternal, it's only showing my paternal chromosomes. So this cousin is a cousin on my paternal side. Now, I knew that my cousin is my second cousin 3 times removed because I found our common ancestor. So you can see that I was the one who entered that in here, but sometimes you don't know that ahead of time. So there's a website that can help you figure out what your relationship with someone could be just by looking at the centimorgans. And this is the same website I showed that I'm showing right now that has DNA. It's called DNA Painter, sorry, and it has the chromosome browser on it. So this is the tool that is also on DNA Painter. It's called the Shared Centimorgan Project. If you look at the chart, here you are right here, and it shows the range of centimorgans that you're likely to share someone with a specific relationship. So if you look with a parent, you share between 2,376 centimorgans and 3,720 centimorgans. With a grandparent, here's the range, and you can see the range on all of them. And so you can enter in the amount of shared centimorgans you have with someone at this box right here, and it will tell you the relationship possibilities based on probability. So we're going to use my second cousin 3 times removed as an example. As I said, I already knew our relationship because I found our common ancestor. But if I wouldn't have known that, then this website is really helpful to start figuring that out. So I put in here 74 centimorgans, and you can see here's the probability, and here's all of the different relationships that person could be to me based on the amount of DNA we share. So it's 30% likely that someone who shares 74 centimorgans with me, that they're a third cousin, a half second cousin once removed, a second cousin twice removed, etc. And if we look here on the second line, it shows second cousin 3 times removed, which is my cousin's relationship to me. So this is a useful tool, as I said, for trying to figure out your relationships with cousin matches where you don't know who the common ancestor is and how they fit into your family. Also, before we talk about these takeaways, I'll go back to the last page. One thing that is important to know about cousin matches is that you will share centimorgans with a lot of people, but once you get to about 7 centimorgans shared or lower, you want to be really careful. Some of these matches are true relatives, but oftentimes they're false matches. Some DNA is shared among all humans, and that's just what makes us human. But other DNA, everyone from a certain ethnicity shares, and there's, so there's a lot of reasons why we could share DNA, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we're related. So when you're looking at your matches and you're looking at really small amounts of centimorgans shared with someone, like around, 7 centimorgans or fewer than that, just in that range, you want to be wary of using these people as evidence to prove something, because they might not even be your true cousin, and you could come to the wrong conclusion and never know. And that could cause problems later in the future. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now to the takeaways. Today we talked about how the DNA test that you've taken is an autosomal DNA test and what autosomes are. We talked about the basics of inheritance and how chromosomes recombine. This helped us understand why our siblings have slightly different DNA and ethnicity results and why it could be useful for them to be tested. They might have inherited DNA from distant ancestors that you didn't inherit DNA from. We also talked about how testing the oldest generation is super important because they have DNA from older generations that you didn't inherit. This can help you get connected with more cousins and figure out those mysteries in your family tree. We talked about how CM means centimorgan, and that centimorgans indicate how much DNA you share with a relative. You can use the amount of CM or centimorgans to figure out relationships using the Shared Centimorgan Project tool, this one, on the DNA Painter website. We talked about chromosome browsers, this one, and how they help you visualize where you share your DNA with your matches. This can help you discover who shares common ancestors and break down those brick walls. This can help. We also talked how it's important to be wary with matches who share small amounts of centimorgans because they could be false matches. The DNA you share with them could be just DNA that all humans share, or just all people from a certain ethnicity share. Okay, so that was quite a lot of information in a little amount of time, but I hope this presentation was helpful for you and you were able to get your questions answered by this presentation and in the chat. Thank you for your time. Please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, Facebook Messenger, or email if you have further questions, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. And here below, I have my contact information listed for those 3 websites. Additionally, this presentation will be posted for you to rewatch at a later time. So I think you should be able to pause it and write those down if you'd like to. Thank you again. I look forward to your questions if you choose to contact me. For more great content, check out the RootsTech page. And good luck with your genetic genealogy research.